Rex, the German Shepherd police dog, suddenly erupted into frantic barking, his growls deep and powerful as he locked his gaze onto the pregnant woman standing before him. The woman, visibly startled by the dog's intense reaction, instinctively took a cautious step back, her eyes wide with alarm. One hand instinctively cradled her swollen belly, her body tensing as a wave of unease washed over her. Her heart began to race, and she could feel the weight of everyone's eyes on her. The sharp, persistent barking seemed to echo through the crowded terminal, making her feel more exposed, more vulnerable. "Please, make him stop," she pleaded desperately, her voice trembling with a mix of confusion and fear as she looked around, hoping someone would come to her aid. Her gaze flitted from officer to officer, but no one seemed to have an immediate answer, and the silence in the air grew heavy. Mark, one of the security officers, stood frozen for a moment, his brow furrowed as he watched Rex. He knew his K9 partner well, and he could sense that something was off. Rex wasn't reacting on impulse, like he would to a simple threat. There was something deeper, more intense in his behavior. Mark exchanged a quick glance with the other officers. They had seen Rex detect dangerous substances before, but this felt different. Was the woman hiding something illegal? Or was there something more dangerous going on, something that no one else could perceive? Mark's own unease grew as he began to question whether Rex had picked up on something no one else had noticed, his instincts telling him that this wasn't just a routine security check. The woman stood frozen, her eyes wide with fear as Rex continued to bark, his body low and tense, as if ready to leap at any moment. A cold sweat broke out across her forehead, and her breath came in quick, shallow bursts. She looked around desperately, searching for someone, anyone, who could explain what was happening. The noise, the stares, the aggressive barking, it was all too much. She clutched her belly tighter, her fingers trembling as they wrapped protectively around her unborn child. "I don't understand," she said, her voice barely audible, cracking under the weight of panic. "I haven't done anything wrong." Her plea hung in the air, fragile and desperate, but no one moved to comfort her. The crowd around them had grown. Curious passengers stood still, their boarding passes forgotten in their hands, eyes fixed on the unfolding drama. Some looked concerned, others suspicious, whispering to one another as if trying to guess what this woman, this frightened, visibly pregnant woman, might have done to provoke a police dog. The woman could feel their judgment, their curiosity pressing in on her like walls. She looked at the officers, hoping for reassurance, but found only tense faces and unreadable expressions. Mark's jaw tightened as he watched her. His gut twisted with uncertainty. She didn't look dangerous, if anything, she looked terrified. But Rex wasn't letting up, and Mark had learned long ago to trust his partner. The dog wasn't just barking out of instinct or fear. Rex had been trained for years, his senses honed to detect threats invisible to the human eye. Drugs, explosives, chemical traces, things no one else could see or smell. Still, this situation didn't match any of their standard profiles. Something about it felt off. Mark took a deep breath and stepped forward, his tone calm but firm. "Ma'am, we need to ask you a few questions," he said, watching her closely. Her eyes filled with panic, and she instinctively took a step backward, shaking her head as if she could will the situation away. Her lips parted, as if she wanted to protest again, but no words came out, only a dry gasp. Realizing they couldn't leave anything to chance, Mark made the call. "We need to take her in for further screening," he said to the officers nearby. His voice was low but resolute. The woman flinched, visibly stricken by the decision. "No, please. I haven't done anything," she whispered, but the officers approached gently, placing reassuring hands on her arms. They spoke softly to her, trying to calm her as they guided her toward a private screening room away from the growing crowd. Her legs moved stiffly beneath her, almost unwillingly, and her face was pale with dread. As Mark followed behind with Rex still growling low, he couldn't shake the strange feeling in his chest. This wasn't normal. This wasn't just about airport security. There was something happening, something urgent, and Rex, as always, had sensed it first. Inside the stark, fluorescent-lit screening room, the atmosphere shifted from tense to fragile. The pregnant woman sat down slowly, her knees trembling as if they could no longer support her. Her breathing was shallow, erratic, and her eyes were wide with a growing storm of confusion and dread. Her hands never left her belly, clutching it tightly as if trying to shield the child inside from whatever unknown danger was unfolding around her. She looked from one officer to the next, her lips parted as though she wanted to speak, but no words came. One female officer, sensing her rising panic, stepped forward carefully. Her voice was gentle but firm. "Ma'am, do you have any medical conditions we should know about?" she asked, kneeling slightly to meet the woman's eye level. The question seemed to catch her off guard. She blinked rapidly, her mouth working around the words before they finally emerged. "No. I mean, I'm 7 months pregnant, that's all," she said, her voice shaking. But there was hesitation in her tone, a flicker of uncertainty, as if something within her didn't quite feel right, even if she couldn't explain what. Outside the room, Rex was no longer barking, but his behavior had changed dramatically. He paced in tight circles just beyond the closed door, whining low in his throat, his ears pinned back. He occasionally stopped to scratch at the door, letting out sharp whimpers of distress. Mark watched him, heart pounding. This was not standard alert behavior. This was something else: urgency, desperation. Mark had worked with Rex long enough to know that his partner was more than just a trained detector. He was intuitive, sometimes even uncanny in his responses. And right now, Rex was scared. Then, without warning, a gasp tore through the stillness of the room. Mark was already reaching for the door as he heard the sound, sharp, broken, unmistakably filled with pain. Inside, the woman's face had contorted in agony. Her hands flew to her stomach, her body curling slightly as if to protect herself. Her eyes filled with panic as a fresh wave of pain coursed through her. "Something's wrong," she whispered, her voice barely audible, her lips trembling. Beads of sweat began to form on her forehead, and her skin had taken on a pale, almost grayish hue. Her breathing was ragged now, each inhale a struggle, and her entire body shook. Mark rushed in just as her legs gave out beneath her. An officer managed to catch her and ease her into a chair, but the alarm in the room had already skyrocketed. "Get medical assistance, now!" Mark barked, his voice cutting through the confusion. Officers sprang into action, one of them calling for paramedics while another cleared the hallway. Rex's scratching at the door became more frantic, his anxious whines almost human in their desperation. In that moment, everything shifted. This wasn't about suspicion anymore, it was about survival. Mark could feel it in his gut. The woman wasn't hiding anything dangerous. She was the danger, only not to others, but to herself and her unborn baby. Something was happening inside her, something that couldn't wait. And Rex, faithful, intuitive Rex, had sensed it all along. The moment the paramedics arrived, it was as if the entire airport held its breath. The lead medic, a man with graying hair and steady hands, dropped to his knees beside the woman without hesitation. "Ma'am, stay with me," he said firmly but gently, his voice cutting through the growing panic. The woman's head lolled slightly, but she turned her eyes toward him, wide and terrified. Her lips moved as she whispered, "Please, help my baby," the words quivering with fear and pain. Mark stood nearby, heart hammering against his ribs. He had dealt with countless emergency situations over the years, drug smugglers, bomb threats, even violent passengers, but nothing had felt quite like this. There was no protocol for gut instinct or canine intuition. He kept a hand on Rex's collar, but the dog was no longer pulling to chase or confront. Instead, he was whining, low, urgent, almost pleading. His whole body was tense, ears pinned back, and his eyes locked on the woman with a kind of desperate intensity that made Mark's stomach turn. The paramedics moved swiftly, checking the woman's vitals as they prepared her for transport. One of them shook his head. "Her pulse is erratic," he muttered, slipping an oxygen mask over her face. "We don't have much time." Another medic carefully lifted her shirt, gently placing his hand on her swollen belly to check for fetal movement. He paused, his brow furrowing. "Wait a second," he said quietly, pressing more firmly. His face paled. "This isn't just early labor," he said slowly, looking up at the others. Something else is happening. Something's not right. Mark's breath caught. Every instinct in his body screamed that they were missing something crucial, something Rex had known from the beginning. He turned to look at his partner, who let out another sharp whine and scratched at the floor with one paw, as if urging them to hurry. The woman groaned again, her voice rising with panic. "I don't know what's wrong. I just want my baby to be okay," she sobbed. Her hands clenched into fists, clutching at the stretcher's rails as fresh pain racked her body. Then came the final confirmation. One of the medics turned to Mark, his face grim. "She has an internal rupture," he said, not sugarcoating it. "If we don't get her into surgery immediately, she and the baby won't make it." Mark's blood ran cold. The words echoed in his ears like a death sentence. And yet, beneath the panic, a fierce surge of awe welled up inside him. Rex had known. He'd tried to warn them. Not about a bomb or drugs, but about something no human eye or scanner could see. The threat hadn't come from outside, it had been within her all along. "Clear the way," one of the paramedics shouted, as they wheeled her stretcher out of the room. Chaos erupted in the terminal as stunned passengers looked on, frozen in place. Officers moved quickly, shouting for space, pushing open doors, and guiding the team toward the waiting ambulance. Mark ran alongside the gurney, Rex at his side, both of them moving with a singular purpose. Every second ticked louder in Mark's mind. The woman's breathing was growing more shallow, her skin clammy, her eyes fluttering shut. One paramedic kept her talking, gripping her hand. "Stay with us. You're almost there." Rex whined again, pressing close to the stretcher, as if willing her to hold on just a little longer. Mark reached down and brushed his hand across the dog's head, his voice tight with emotion. "Hang in there, buddy. We're almost through." As the ambulance doors slammed shut and the sirens wailed to life, Mark stood frozen for a moment, watching them vanish into the distance. And then, with a deep, shaky breath, he turned to Rex. The dog's eyes were still fixed on the direction the ambulance had gone. He didn't move. Didn't wag his tail. Didn't relax. He was waiting. Just like Mark. The night air was thick with tension as Mark sat outside the hospital, a heavy stillness surrounding him. The distant hum of traffic and the occasional murmur from hospital staff were the only sounds that broke the silence. He sat on a bench near the emergency entrance, elbows on his knees, hands clasped tightly together as if in silent prayer. Rex lay at his feet, resting but alert, his head lifting every time the hospital doors opened, his ears perking with every approaching footstep. Time had slowed to a crawl. Mark couldn't remember how many times he'd checked the clock on his phone or stared at the doors, willing someone, anyone, to come out with news. Each passing second stretched endlessly, filled with worry and guilt. What if they had acted too late? What if the woman and her baby didn't make it? He looked down at Rex, whose tail twitched softly against the concrete. The dog's eyes were fixed on the entrance, unwavering, like he too was waiting for confirmation that everything they'd fought for that day hadn't been in vain. Mark sighed, running a hand through his hair. "You knew, didn't you?" he murmured quietly to his partner. "You knew something was wrong long before any of us did." It was more than just pride in his voice, it was awe. Rex hadn't just followed his training, he'd sensed something no machine or scanner ever could. Mark had trusted that instinct, but the weight of that decision was pressing down on him now like a storm. If they had been wrong, the consequences would have been unthinkable. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the hospital doors swung open. A doctor in blue scrubs stepped out, his face lined with exhaustion. Mark stood up instantly, heart in his throat. His legs felt stiff from sitting so long, but adrenaline pushed him forward. Rex rose too, poised and tense at his side. The doctor approached slowly, his expression unreadable. For a heartbeat, Mark feared the worst. But then, a small, tired smile tugged at the corners of the doctor's lips. "She made it," he said simply. "Both the mother and the baby are stable. They're going to be okay." Mark exhaled so sharply it felt like all the air had been knocked out of him. He turned away briefly, blinking hard to keep his emotions in check. His jaw clenched as he swallowed the lump rising in his throat. Beside him, Rex gave a small, almost knowing whine, his tail beginning to wag, a slow, relieved thump against Mark's leg. The doctor continued, his voice filled with quiet amazement. There was an undetected internal rupture. If she hadn't gotten medical attention when she did, neither of them would have survived. I don't know how your dog figured it out, but he did. He saved her life. Mark nodded slowly, words failing him. He looked down at Rex, and for a moment, he saw not just a service dog, but a guardian, loyal, brave, and extraordinary. Just then, a nurse approached holding a small folded piece of paper. "This is from the mother," she said gently, handing it to Mark. With trembling fingers, Mark opened the note. The handwriting was shaky, but the message was clear, heartfelt, and utterly devastating in its simplicity. "Tell the dog he's my angel." The words hit Mark like a tidal wave. He blinked rapidly, his eyes stinging with emotion. For a long moment, he just stood there, staring at the note, the sounds of the hospital fading into the background. Then he crouched down beside Rex, his voice thick and low. "You hear that, boy? You're her angel." Rex leaned forward, resting his head gently against Mark's chest, as if he understood the weight of that message. Mark wrapped an arm around him, holding him close, no longer caring who saw. In that quiet moment, under the flickering hospital lights, the gravity of what had happened began to sink in. They hadn't just stopped a tragedy, they had rewritten the ending. Not with weapons or commands, but with trust, instinct, and the unspoken bond between a man and his dog. And for the first time that night, Mark allowed himself to smile. They had made it. They had truly made it.